And as somebody who came to Springsteen quite late in my life, like Springsteen was my dad's music growing up. And one of the things that was such a joy is once you realize, oh no, my dad was onto something. It's not just that just because my dad likes it doesn't mean it's uncool.
Right.
Is that there is such, like, there are some of these 80s seminal artists and you go, oh, they're cool now. But actually, in amongst their catalog, there is one bit of work that is really good. And then there's maybe 3 or 4 bits of filler, or sometimes they don't even have that. Maybe they've only got 2 and only one of them's any good, right? But the thing that is really fun discovering Springsteen later in life is that there is so much to unpack, and it's all good. It wasn't a case of putting out records to fill deadlines. He clearly is a storyteller who, I guess, in a way that as a comedian I relate to very much, is like what drives the urge to create is that you want to tell a story about the time that you're in, and the time is always changing, and so that story is always different.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Listing Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson. Today, we are getting off the Springsteen train, though he will come up, as he normally does, because I have a timey-wimey episode. It's my morning. It's Anthony's afternoon, and we're going to be talking a little Blink-182 and Rage Against the Machine. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jesse, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
So tell my audience a little about yourself.
So I'm born in Melbourne. I moved to London about 4 or 5 years ago. I'm a stand-up comedian by like my main sort of goal, ambition, pursuit. And obviously, the last year has made moving halfway across the world to be on live stages in very packed rooms a very bad idea.
I was going to ask how that was going for you, because over this past year, I've had several musicians join me, and they'll talk about, how do you promote a new album when you can't do a gig in front of people, and have the little CD afterwards to sell. So I imagine the same thing. It's like, how do you do live comedy?
Yeah, so I have to be honest, there are Zoom gigs and there are virtual gigs, but if you've ever been in like a Zoom meeting, you will know that part of, because workplaces around the world are trying to do fun Zoom things, and they expect you to do it in your time, and you go, as nice as all of this is, as fun as all of this is, I've sat in front of a computer all day. The last thing I want to do is be having my entertainment and my fun in the exact same environment that my work is happening in right now. So I didn't do Zoom gigs. And so it has been challenging because, as you were talking about dropping albums and promoting albums, I've been doing comedy for 10 years. In October, November of 2019, I recorded my special that is sort of up until now the best bit of work I got, with an idea of I'll release that as an album in early 2020, and then I'll never perform that material again, and I'll be forced to get out there, promote the album to get people to discover it, and write my new material. As it turns out, I have not performed that material again, but by completely different circumstances.
Yeah, I can only imagine, and I do think it's kind of interesting as a comedian. What is the it's that old joke, as much as I love the new stuff, I love when he does the classic bits. And so there is that little bit of people want to hear new jokes and new stories, but they also love going back, when you bring a friend going, oh, wait, this is great, listen.
Yeah, I think I can't remember who it was, but there was a really good comedian who said if people are paying, because I think particularly at the high end of ticket prices, if you're an arena comic and you're
Yeah.
charging a bit, that people will want to hear the old jokes once, but then once they do, you kind of train them that they don't need to see you again because
Right.
they're not getting anything new. And so,
Yeah.
as much as possible, so a completely different comedy culture in Australia where it's kind of not as big a population, so you have to do the festival shows is
Yes.
more than the clubs to make money. And so, yeah, I in the habit of trying to 75% new material every time I do a festival show, because
Yeah.
at least that way people go, I need to come back to see it's going to be different.
Well, and I think that for our first and not last connection to Springsteen, right? One of the reasons why the Springsteen fandom want to see him perform live so much is it isn't the same show every time. I mean, he up to sometimes up to 50-60% of his set are different songs every night. And
Yeah,
so while everyone loves Born to Run and we all go crazy when he does Born to Run, it's the idea that you get something that you haven't heard before or you haven't heard very often. So
yeah.
yeah.
And as somebody who came to Springsteen quite late in my life, like Springsteen was my dad's music for
Sure,
me when I was
absolutely.
growing up. And one of the things that was such a joy is once you realize, oh no, my dad was onto something. It's not just that just because my dad likes it doesn't mean it's uncool.
Right.
Is that there is such there are some of these 80s seminal artists, and you go, oh, they're cool now, but actually, in amongst their catalog, there is one bit of work that is really good, and then there's maybe 3 or 4 bits of filler, or sometimes they don't even have that. Maybe they've only got 2 and only one of them's any good, right? But the thing that is really fun discovering Springsteen later in life is that there is so much to unpack, and it's all good. It wasn't a case of putting out records to fill deadlines. He
Yeah.
clearly is a storyteller who, I guess, in a way that as a comedian I relate to very much, is like what drives the urge to create is that you want to tell a story about the time that you're in, and the time is always changing, and so that story is always different.
Yeah, I totally agree. In fact, that's one of the idea that he's continuing to be creative and to share is pretty amazing. And I do think of the old quote. I think it was Samuel Clemens or Mark Twain, right? That said, I left home at 18, came back at 22, and I was surprised how much my father had learned in those in those 4 years,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
so it is kind of interesting. So let's go right into that, Anthony. Growing up, what kind of music? I take it Bruce Springsteen was played in the house. What else did your parents play a lot for you when you were a kid?
So my parents had very different tastes, and all good, and mostly stuff that I have grown to love as an adult. So my mum loved Prince and UB40 and some of the reggae, Bob Marley, some of that stuff. And my dad was definitely a big rock guy, so he liked Springsteen, he liked Queen, he liked I guess the one kind of crossover artist that both my parents had, and that has been the one I took to quickest as a result, I guess, was Stevie Wonder. I was super lucky to get to see him live a few years ago. It was a bucket list item for me. So,
Oh, I can imagine.
yeah, so that I was lucky enough to have parents with pretty good taste in music, and when I grew out of being too cool for that, it's been a really, really fun thing to kind of rediscover and connect and realize that your parents are pretty cool.
Yeah, that is. So, what era did you go to high school or secondary school, and what were you enjoying when you were in your rebellious teen years?
So I started high school in the year 2000, so I was class of 2000, 34 now.
Yeah.
And so for me, the two that really like influenced my life the most, and in completely different ways. And one I'm prouder of than the other. So Blink-182 were the first band I saw live,
Sure.
and I would say potentially the closest thing I saw to stand-up comedy live first, because I was like 13, and you had these people who, and looking back, by the way, it is ridiculous because they were fully grown adults making jokes that were written for teenagers. It is absolute nonsense. Like,
Hold on just a minute. That's my wife calling. I'm going to pause just a minute. Okay. Hey, LJ. Not much. I'm on a podcast. She was camping all weekend, and she's let me know she's on her way home. So,
oh,
yes.
dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's super sweet, too.
All right, so you're going to this Blink-182. Here's adults, and you're saying this is your first thought of stand-up comedian.
Yeah, it's crazy as an adult to realize how much the irreverence and like just the ability that these guys got paid to make the sort of jokes that me and my friends were making at the time.
Yeah.
Was like, oh, I didn't realize you could just, that was a thing you could do, because in high school they're always telling you, like, obviously if you are goofing off, your teachers want to discipline that behavior out of you.
Yes.
And then to see that behavior being celebrated is like, oh, maybe there is a way that I can not be like my teachers, So it was much more than the music. It was their interactions on stage and a lot of it now I look back, and as somebody who tries to tell jokes for a living, it's like, oh man, I should have a better entry into comedy than this absolute fluff. But
were you the typical class clown?
I don't think typical. I would say actually maybe like the one thing that is true of me as a high school student is that I was definitely, I come from a poor area and not a great school. I was academically, like, I found the basics of school quite easy. And so I was understimulated. And that tended to mean that I'd goof off to make entertainment for myself. I don't think I was a class clown in the way that, you get this depiction of somebody who hated school. And I was just a bored kid.
Yeah, and just trying to amuse yourself and amuse your classrooms. And I said a long time ago, there was something going around that I can't remember what it was, but they talked about what are 5 things that are true. And and one of the things I said was you can't enjoy a movie in the theater without fresh popcorn, right? Like, that's something I know that is a fact. And the other thing is, there is almost no better feeling in the world than making someone else laugh.
Yeah.
It's one of my thoughts. And I think that is, you get that first hit, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, this was cool.
Yeah, and it's really weird looking back on it now as an adult, right? With friends who are teachers and family with children, and you go, oh, some of what you did was not great, but also that it's systemic, right? It's the schools are stretched, the teachers are stretched, and because of that, people get left behind and they make their own fun. And I am a case of that, right?
Yeah.
And it was definitely something that would have distracted some kids who didn't find school as easy as me.
So when you started thinking about you wanted to do this for a living, to tell jokes, I think a lot of people are work funny, right? Like, I will say something funny at work and everyone will laugh and, oh, Jesse, you're so funny. And then I have enough sense that I know that if I'm standing in front of a group of employees, or even at a seminar back when they used to do, business meetings, I can be funny because I'm in that situation where I'm giving a presentation on call center software. They're not expecting someone to necessarily be funny, so I can make it really entertaining. that is a different muscle than going to a festival or a comedy club where people have paid anywhere
Yeah.
from a few pounds to 20 pounds, have
Yeah.
drinks, they've taken their significant other out, and they go, okay, MF, be funny.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
totally different dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah. 100%. And, as somebody who's done this a long time now, it is one of the moments of Schadenfreude, and it's super endearing, but also just super funny to watch somebody who is definitely the funny person in their friendship group doing their first gig, because there
Yes.
is a bravado and a sense of there is a sense of just completely not knowing what you've gotten into. It's like seeing somebody poking a dog with a stick and then the dog jumps the fence, where you
Yeah.
go, you're going to get what you deserve now.
Yeah.
They come on stage like they're bulletproof, and then they go, here's my joke. And everyone goes, oh, we're supposed to laugh. And you can see them go, the moment where they go, oh, it's not as easy as they make it look.
Yes.
And there is a moment of Schadenfreude that I think most comedians get seeing that. It is, as you said, it's a completely different muscle, because so much of humor is, as you mentioned, in the surprise. It's in the, I didn't expect that to happen, boom, that's funny. And in a comedy club, you kind of have to play with the suspension of disbelief that the audience need to feel like the jokes were a surprise, but they know you're trying to.
Yeah.
It's like a street magician where they know you're trying to trick them. Your job is to trick them anyway.
Yeah, and one of my favorite, I'm a big Penn and Teller fan, and one of the people that is on his podcast is Matt Donnelly, has done a lot of improv, and he talks a lot about it, and he has just started trying to do magic himself, and they say a lot of the skills that he used in improv and in comedy help him in magic because he's comfortable with talking and sharing things. I also think it's got to be interesting because if you're a musician, you come out on stage, you start with a song. It may be a song everyone knows, it may be a song no one knows, but you're going to get their attention. One of my go-to jokes, and as everyone knows, my name's Jesse Jackson, and I'm very white, and I always say I look different than I do. Like, hi, I'm Jesse Jackson. I look different than I do on TV, and
Yeah.
that usually gets me a joke, right? That breaks the ice. But if I'm in front of the improv, that they're gonna like, okay, so what, fat boy? What keep talking? What's going on?
Yeah. It is funny. It is funny the way that, and to be fair, there's so many different performance elements, and nobody in the audience is thinking about this consciously. It all just happens. It's magic happening in the back of the brain. But like one of the things that I like to do just to make it fun for me, because you're telling the same jokes night on night on night, is try and find something in the room, whether it be something the MC says before it, or just something visually in the room, and start there, because then it grounds the audience in it is a bit more surprising, because the audience go, oh, this was just for tonight.
Yeah.
And part of the trick of that is then the audience are like, what else actually was just for tonight? And they're a bit kinder to you. And then you mentioned the thing of, like, with a musician, if you want, you can get up, you can play a song, you can say, hey, I'm blah, you play a song, and then they listen, and you stop and they applaud. And then if you're a nobody, if you're not the name on the ticket, you're a support act or whatever, that in the background, will I pay attention or not, is such an important and beautiful gift. Because as a comedian, like, if you go on to a room that wasn't expecting you to be on, that there's no ability for comedy to exist in the background. Like, either people are paying attention or they're not.
Yeah.
And by the time, and also, even if an audience doesn't like a song, they know that when it's silence, oh, that's the end of the song, and as a good audience, we applaud, right?
Right. That's we're trained how to do that.
Yeah,
but with
if they don't like the joke, by the time they realize, oh, that's where I was supposed to laugh, they can't laugh and make it up.
Right. Yeah. I guess I could go, okay, that was it. the um so uh I, I I know we're kind of off music, but I'm
Yeah.
fascinated by this journey of yours. Um, you know, what why did you decide to make the plunge where you went from, okay, I think I what have you did you always want to do this, or was there a light a light switch that said, okay, you know what, I'm going to dump into the deep end and I've got 5 minutes, which
Yeah.
seems an internally on stage, right?
It,
uh
it really is so much longer than you can imagine. I'll give you the condensed version, and
Please.
it does also include a link back to music because it kind of all happened in those formative teenage years. So essentially, see Blink 182, they're being funny on stage. Oh, that's something you can do. Started looking into comedy, like going to live gigs around town. Um, and then my second artist who was hugely influential to me at the time, I was also listening to a lot of, which is Rage Against the Machine. And so there were two things happening in my head at once that I hadn't ever considered before. And one was that you can use a performative space to be political. You could let it, it felt to me at 13, 14, if I wanted to talk to people about politics, and particularly people my age, they're a bit like, but if you shared them a Rage Against the Machine song and it was like, hey, what about the lyrics on that?
Yes.
Then they'd engage with you, right? It was like tricking people to care about and have the conversations you wanted to. Then there was this comedy thing happening that I was discovering. And then in between that, there was a comedian I found who was doing both of those things. He was a guy back home, Will Anderson, fantastic comedian, and who does great, just hilarious hours of comedy, brilliant storytelling. But then you get to the end and you tell the people you're there with, you're like, hey, that thing that he said, and you could start having these conversations. And so that was it for me. It was like, oh, this is something that combines these two things that I'm super interested in. Let's find out. So then I was going to a bunch of gigs and just loving comedy, but not sure whether I had the chops or whatever. And then eventually, like most people will tell you, they saw somebody so good that they were like, okay, I have to get on stage and do what he's doing. Mine's the exact opposite. I was investigating comedy. I was seeing a lot of comedy. And then I saw somebody so bad that I was like, wow, if he gets to do that, then I can do whatever the hell I want because I'm not going to be worse than that guy.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Yeah.
And so what's the hardest part of doing it? And not let's obviously we're talking about pre-COVID. What's the hardest part of trying to do this for a living?
I would say the truth of the matter is that I don't think people understand just how many great comedians are there. And so the difference between the people who get discovered and have their big break and not is partly luck. There's a million people just as funny as the people on TV that just didn't get as lucky. And what those people in that bracket below have to do to make a living is hustle hard. You've got to tour. You've got to constantly be booking gigs, and
Yeah.
it's kind of relentless. And so I think that like just because you're working nights, you're probably on the road a lot. Like it's not a natural way to live,
Yeah.
and so that's always been one of the reasons that I've kind of kept one foot in, one foot out. Like I'll tour, I'll do my festival shows, but I've always kept the second stream of income because there's always part of me that goes, what I don't want to be is somebody who wakes up 50 on the road, no real stable roots because I've been touring the whole time. And I think that sacrifice and that hustle is I guess the same as musicians who don't make it, right? It's a big one.
I'll try to look up and I'll send you this link. A writer in Hollywood, guy named Mark Evanier, wrote a wonderful column about and he did not use names, but he told the story that two really good comedians, and one ended up just by luck getting a guest star on a TV show, and it snapped. And then he ended up getting a TV show, and then it was fairly successful, and he went on to another another level. And the other comedian, just as funny, just as talented, never had that spark and
Yeah.
just remained at this other level. And he said, though, and the point of he says he calls it the speech. And his creative friends come to him and say, okay, give me the speech. And the speech basically is, it's not fair.
Yeah.
No, it
Yeah.
just they understand the entertainment business is not fair. You
Yeah.
know, Southside Johnny and Bruce Springsteen, both starting the same, and now I'm biased that, Bruce has a little more talent and spark, but Southside Johnny is an amazing performer. And
Yeah.
it just, it is just, you've got to have a little bit of luck and a little bit of magic. And it just, and that's, um, it's the hope that kills you. As
Yeah.
to quote
Yeah. Yeah.
Picasso.
100%. And as you said, it is I think you made a really good point there, in that even if we go, yes, Bruce, slightly more charismatic, slightly more talented, equally hardworking, like, you take nothing away from him, but what you then go is he proportionate to his fan base, his success, his money? Is he that much better? And the answer is almost, if you look at people at the top of the entertainment industry and somebody at 10, are they that much better versus
Right.
where they got? Absolutely never. Like, it's never that way.
Right.
It all hoovers up to whoever's at the top.
Yeah.
That's just the way it is. But so, yeah, that is, I guess, the hardest thing about it.
So I wanted, we talked before we hit record. You wanted to talk a little bit. I'm going to switch gears.
Yeah.
Um, Obviously, Rage Against the Machine. We're very familiar because of Tom Morello.
Yeah.
He's told the story multiple times that, they had started covering the ghost of Tom Joad, and then Bruce asked him on stage how to do it, and they, and I can't remember what key, right? But, like, they're debating on what key, and Bruce says, okay, we're going to do it in this key, and it's going to be great. And, he's like, okay, that's why he's the boss.
Yeah.
And then, for a little bit over a year, he filled in for Little Steven and was a guitarist on the E Street Band. And I was not a Rage Against the Machine fan. I vaguely knew him, but I saw so much joy in his face. Like, I can't believe I'm here. I can't believe I'm effing playing the guitar with the E Street Band, and
Yeah.
had
Yeah.
so much fun. And I become a fan of his because of how strong he's been. Not only how much he loves music and talked about loving Kiss and all this other bands, but his political views are interesting. So you wanted to mention, you said a little bit that you find it amusing sometimes about fandom and that. So talk to me a little bit about that, Anthony.
Yeah. So I think that is one of the reasons I loved the idea of talking about Rage Against the Machine on this podcast, is because I think Bruce and Rage Against the Machine inherently have this thing where their music is unapologetically their political opinion. It seeps through everything they can do. You'd have to be deliberately not looking for it to not see that it's there, right? Speaking on Rage in particular, because they're the ones I've spent more time in, like, lyrically, there is nothing ambiguous about some of those who work forces are the same who burn crosses, right? That is lyrically unambiguous. And then you have these people in the comment section going to Tom Morello on Instagram, man, I used to love your music as a kid, but now you're all political. What are you doing? You're an idiot. Leave politics out of it. It's like, dude, politics was never not in this, right?
Right, like, have you ever listened to his music?
And then, yeah, Bruce has the same thing, right? It's
Right.
the same thing. He's, even since recently when he started doing the podcast with Obama and all these people got on, oh, why are you working with that guy? He was never not going to be an Obama fan. Have you ever listened to anything that he did?
Right. I mean, when President Trump was in the hospital with COVID, right, they had his fans, supporters outside playing Born in the USA, and people like, have they ever listened to the song? Like, do they not? And I had a lady on a few months ago, Heather, who is a huge Leonard Cohen fan.
Yeah.
And she talked about it, and she said, you know what's funny? Leonard Cohen and Bruce Springsteen's most famous songs are their most misunderstood song, because Hallelujah is not this religious, joyous
Oh,
celebration of God, and Born in
yeah.
the USA isn't this. And I had a lady on yesterday that I didn't want to correct. She says, "Oh, Bruce Springsteen, it just means America. I mean, his songs are all about like Born in the USA." And I just wanted to go, yes, his songs are about America, but it's the different between the American dream and the American reality, and it always has been.
Yeah, and I think again, I'm going to say something, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from my listenings to Bruce, one of the things that I think is true is I don't think it's wrong to say that he's proudly patriotic, like he loves his country, but he loves his country enough to be honest about how it can be better. And there is a difference
Yes.
between being patriotic and hoping for the best, and then being the kind of patriot who holds your country back by saying that there's nothing we can improve.
Yeah. And, and hey, I'm like everyone else, proud to be an American and all that stuff. But that also doesn't mean, I'm a 61-year-old white guy.
Mm.
I have it, especially this past year with the Black Lives Matter and all the here in the U.S. the white supremacists that's come up, the anti-gay, woman, and just all this stuff. I realize, I can only see from my view, and I think the first thing I have to realize is I can't view what other people are experiencing. And so I have to acknowledge that. And I have to acknowledge that my American dream is different than someone else's. And, Bruce said a long time ago, if we don't all win, if we don't all win, none of us win. And people go like, oh, that's communism. No, what he's saying is everyone needs a fair shot. Everyone needs the help, and we got to be there for each other.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think to kind of contradict myself a tiny bit,
That's okay.
the interesting thing about um that and about, I guess, again, not wanting to compare my comedy to Bruce Springsteen
No,
at
no,
all,
no. I understand.
although just to pull the thread is that um I was talking about how do these people not see the politics there, and the part of that is that the best way to communicate about your political ideals, because you, as you said, you only see them through your eyes. The best way to communicate them is to tell your story from a personal place and hope that the political messages that you want to get out there are told demonstratively, like show don't tell sort of thing. Because if I got on stage and I was like, this is what I think about this, this is what I think about this, this is what I think about this, A, I'd sound like a politician. B, people hate politicians. So
Exactly.
I wouldn't get very far as a comedian. So instead, I tell my stories, I put the jokes in, and then I hope people get the message out of that. And I guess in doing that, there are probably people who will go away from my shows and think, oh my God, what a funny guy. Thank God he didn't put any of those politics in there. And then they hear me on this podcast and they go, oh no, tricked again.
No, but Anthony, it's in satire and political satire is a narrow band. You've got to be funny, you've got to be universal. But I tweeted just recently, and it's not an original thought. I said, okay, I just want to make sure I understand this. It's wrong that the right totally support a bakery telling a gay couple, no, we won't bake a cake for you. And they go, that is free enterprise. Everything is great. We applaud that totally. You stupid liberals forcing people to do things, you're wrong. Major League Baseball says, hey, we don't like these new voter laws in Georgia, so therefore we're moving our all-star game. What? No, you need to stay out of politics. You need to do it's what I would guess, and I'm not going to put words in your mouth, and I want you to expand on this. Hypocrisy is a fertile ground for comedy.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, absolutely. Because I think that is a beautifully observed thing. Because you are exactly right. Because we all go through our days and we accept a level of these double standards because we don't have time to unpick them, right? And one of the beautiful things as a comedian that you get to do is go, it's like a funhouse mirror at a fair, right? You go, this is what you look like, but also I'm going to blow up these particular bits and really show you them in high definition. And so you're talking about the bakery stuff. I've started toying around with some of those ideas myself because the big thing here at the moment is the idea of these vaccine passports, which have got the same people who say a bakery should be allowed to say no to whoever they want, saying, well, no business should be able to say no if I'm not vaccinated. It's like, well, where is the difference? My favorite one of those I saw was a guy who tweeted something like, if pubs have vaccine passports, I don't care if I have to drive 5,000 miles. I'll drive 5,000 miles and spend my hard-earned money on beer there before I buy a beer at a pub with a vaccine passport on the way like closer. And I was just like, oh, what a surprise. The guy who thinks drink driving is not dangerous is not worried about COVID. Like, you absolute madman.
Yeah, my favorite is, and this is, they show that in Texas, a NRA membership card, the government issued license that you're permitted to carry a firearm is considered ID to vote. A university ID is not considered a valid ID to vote. Like, wait, what are we trying to do here? That's and I do get the idea that when my son, who's now an adult, but when he went to go play baseball, we had to bring records of his immunizations, all his shots. We had to have a birth certificate. I'm like, why? You can't believe that he's 11? No, I had to bring a birth certificate, to play freaking Little League baseball.
Yeah. Heaven forbid he hits the ball a little bit too hard, Jesse.
Yes, exactly. So are there songs? Talk to me about Rage Against the Machine and Blink-182 and other maybe artists. What are songs that you go back to routinely to either keep you motivated, give you faith, maybe when you're in a down mood, you feel sorry for yourself? Talk to me about some of those songs.
So I will say, as good as Blink-182 were at the time, yes, I am lucky enough that my musical tastes have expanded to the point that, if I'm putting Blink-182, it will be a live album and it'll be purely nostalgic and almost like patting you've moved on from this.
I graduated high school in 1977. So the height of the disco era, so I do not routinely bring out KC and the Sunshine Band's greatest hits. However, if I hear randomly, I am in the TARDIS. I am back to 1977, and I am remembering, the joy we got on Shake, 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 Shake Your Booty.
Yeah. The lyrical genius that is.
Yes. Right. Play that funky music, white boy,
I see what you're getting at. Yeah, it is strange that I do think a weird thing about, and this, I've not thought about this before, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but I do think there's a weird thing about Spotify and the way that music consumption has changed, in that the big artists of my generation, when I was a teenager, haven't graduated to becoming, the golden oldie station song. Right. The golden oldie stations still play the music of my parents' generation, not mine, which I find fascinating.
Hold that point, because I want to go, but I remember Don Henley tells the story from the Eagles that was
Yeah.
in the car, and he heard that someone said, "And now classic rock." And he went, "Holy shit. We're going to become that is a whole different they have repackaged instead of just what's oldies,
Yeah.
like we used like growing up to me hearing songs from the 50s and the 60s, Elvis or
Yeah.
Paul Anka or early other like Chuck Berry, and all of a sudden it's now classic rock, and they've redone this, and that now then multiple generations are listening to what you would have considered, as you said, your parents' music.
Yeah, they did happen to make it timeless in a really, really, I guess, interesting way. Like, good on
Yes.
them. Yeah, I think so. I think for me, Rage Against the Machine are still one that I will go back to. And believe it or not, it's not Killing in the Name. I think Killing in the Name is actually probably some of their weakest because it's just repetitive. It's great, like it's angry as hell, but
Right.
it's a bit repetitive. I really go back to Sleep Now in the Fire, Bulls on Parade, like these kind of everything off kind of Battle of Los Angeles or Evil Empire. I think for me, what those albums did and what they always bring me back to is that there were all these ideas that I had floated around in isolation of each other. Like there was a little bit of uncomfortability with the way the labor system worked, although I would never have articulated that way. There's a bit of problems with racism. There's a bit of problems with like structural inequality. There were all these kind of satellite ideas that I didn't have language for, but they just felt wrong to me as an early teenager. And what Rage Against the Machine did was they introduced me to two things. One is all of the things that I could then go and Google and research, because somehow through their lyrics, they're exposing you to actually political frameworks that are quite well documented, and you can kind of. And then the second, actually, and the most important one of them, is the idea that you can have this spirit of rebellion and this spirit of discontent, and it doesn't have to be a defeatist thing. It doesn't have to be a sad thing. If anything, it can be a energetic and joyous thing. You can actually own that, and you can do it in a way that is not, doesn't this all just suck a bit? Oh God, it just, it's just terrible. No, you can actually like really do something about it. You can have some energy in it. And I found that, I think, a super, super important thing, and something that is always great. Like there is, regardless of what your thing is, going back and remembering the way your thing made you feel when you first discovered it is always a joy.
Yeah, no, well said. I really like that idea. And I still have a very good friend. Her name is Sarah Hickman, and she's now retired. But when she was very young, her first album came out in '89, and someone wrote that she had a little bit of a Joni Mitchell vibe, but instead of, "Oh, you broke my heart and I'm going to sit here and cry," Sarah's music was, "Oh, you broke my heart and that's okay. It'll get better and I'm going to move on." Right.
Yeah.
And I do think that's, very interesting and see. I didn't ask you specifically, but as a Rage Against the Machine fan, were you kind of proud when he was touring with the E Street Band? Did that kind of make you feel? How did that make you feel?
Dude, it was genuinely awesome, and it was genuinely awesome mainly for the reason that you said. You see him on stage, and you see how much this means for him, how much fun he's having doing this. And it does two things. One, it's just nice to see people you've like loved for a long time really just still finding new ways. That's always cool. And then secondly, it does really put into perspective the gravity of Bruce Springsteen as a performer, right? That somebody who I grew up and they were like the biggest band in the world to me, and then they're in this in the same level of fandom. It's not like the fandom changed at all. Like,
Right.
you can see the adoration that I would have if I was on stage with them. You can see that in Tom's eyes when he's on stage with Bruce. It's really cool. I think it's really endearing to
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah. So what should I have asked you that I haven't?
Oh, that's a
Because
good
this has been a
question.
great conversation.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, and I don't think there is anything. Like, I think it's really cool because I, as much as at the top we were like, oh, it's going to be a bit less Brucey, and it probably was considering like the normal deep dive you go on,
Yeah.
but also coming on the show, I was like, it did really make me realize how even though I was, as I said, late to life in terms of enjoying Bruce Springsteen, and I've never spent like I've listened to most albums once or twice, but I've never
Yeah.
really considered myself a fan. But it is crazy then going, actually, how much impact somebody who you did not think of yourself as a
Yeah.
fan of has Satellite had. It's really cool.
Have you spent any time with the latest album, Letter to You?
No, I would say purely because it's I guess it's like one of those TV like I felt like treating it like an episodic TV show
Yeah.
because I want to see what's come before to contextualize what happens next.
So I tell you what, I've done this a couple of times, Anthony, is I've pulled 10 or 12 lesser known Springsteen songs and put that in a Spotify playlist. If you're interested, I can send you the link of that. You could listen to these dozen or so songs, and then I'll have you come back on and we'll talk about them. How's that sound?
That is perfect. Let's do exactly that.
Okay, that sounds great. All right. All right. I did give you some homework. So the song Thunder Road, Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher in the Philadelphia area. He just recently retired. But at the end of he will take 2 days out of his class and they will break apart Thunder Road, looking at all the lyrics, look at the imagery. And at the end of the song, he asks the question, does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road? Anthony, that's your question.
I think so.
Think so?
I think so.
Any explanation, or just you're going to leave it at that?
I'm gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
I am always, whenever there is a degree of literary ambiguity,
Yes.
I'm always one for picking an answer and
Yes.
then sticking to that. I think delving into the realms of philosophical nihilism, I find the idea of that uncertainty, whilst intellectually curious, what good does it hold? So if you just pick an answer and then that's the answer because that's the way I want it to be and I'm going to stick with it.
I love that. It's interesting. I asked this question, Brian Koppelman, the guy who did Billions and he wrote Rounders, and he does a podcast, and he recently did a Ask Brian question. He said, email me questions. And so I emailed him the question, and his daughter ended up picking that email and asked him the question. And he said that he doesn't want to know the answer. He's exactly different at what you're saying. The ambiguity and the emotions of the song is enough for him, and him not knowing is what makes the song so good for him. And I thought that was a really fascinating answer.
Yeah. And I completely get that. And there is a time in my life, in fact, again, to be slightly hypocritical, there is a time in my life where I was the same. Inception, the spinning.
Yes,
top,
exactly. Right.
Will it fall, won't it fall? We don't know, obviously. And in my head, I think that question was what the whole movie was designed to give you. It's Plato's cave in a, how do you ever know, right?
Yeah, it's Schrodinger's cat. The whole premise is it doesn't matter, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you ended up watching, pardon the pun, but HBO did a Watchmen miniseries based on the comic book. And this series ended in a very cliffhanger, vague note. And and as the Damon Lindelof, who wrote Lost, and said, all the answers are there. I mean, we've given you the answer of what happens next, but thematically and creatively, we want to leave it at this point. And I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there is a degree to which that is cool. I think, do you know what's interesting? I
Yeah.
think at a different time in my life,
Yeah.
I may have given a different answer. I think at the moment, with so much uncertainty over such a long period of time, it's exhausting. And so when faced with ambiguity, my thing is like, I'll pick a thing, and until it's proven to not work, let's just do that, because there are so many degrees of uncertainty and anxiety. So just pick,
Yeah.
because otherwise,
Well, it's the I want a happy answer. I want a happy ending.
yeah,
With all the crap that's going on. Um, I I think it's interesting as we're recording this. Prince Philip just died, and so you're in the middle of that. I imagine that,
yeah,
and there, a few people on the right have been like, oh, and basically, you know, Megan killed him by doing this TV, like he was fighting health and he saw his grandson and his, granddaughter-in-law destroy the family on TV, and that's what killed him. He was 99.
and that is, as far as conspiracy theories that goes, that is so funny, because with all due respect to a dude who is polarizing but lived a long life
Yeah.
of structural importance,
Yes.
he has looked unhealthy and 99 and looked 99. Some
Yes.
people like Elizabeth, I don't know how old she actually is, but she looks young. Like she looks.
She does. She does. I mean, she doesn't. I mean, like, in fact, they showed a clip of Charles talking about his father, and I'm like, wow, Prince Charles looks old, which he is.
Yes, yes.
Versus Bruce, we'll go back to, right? Bruce is 71, and you see him, and you're like, every once in
On
a while you go, oh,
stage.
there's a little bit, but yeah, it is just crazy. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, but so with that, the idea that um, this guy who was unfortunately old and ailing
Yes.
somehow saw this TV interview and thought, do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wait a month and then I'll let it kill me.
Exactly. That's great. All right, Anthony. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way to do it?
So I guess my Twitter is at Anthony Jeannot. I'm pretty responsive on that. I've got a weekly podcast called Highbrow Drivel, so you can check me out there as well. I think
What's the
for
name of the
the
podcast? We didn't even get to.
Highbrow Drivel.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's just me, because going on stage is illegal at the moment. Every
Yeah.
week I get one of my friends from comedy and we interview a different academic or politician. So it's
Oh, that
the
sounds
idea of,
great.
yeah, we just try and the ideas that people talk about and don't understand, we're like, okay, well, explain them to us idiots,
Oh, okay.
essentially.
Oh, that sounds
Yeah.
great. Good. Well, all right. Well, thank you, my friend. I will email you a list.
Yes,
We'll have
please.
you back on again. This has been a joy. I hope you've had as much fun as I have.
Absolutely. So nice talking to you, Jesse. Take care. I'll
Oh,
look forward to talking to you again.
all right. So, listeners, you stay safe. Remember to wash your hands. Remember to social distance. Remember to wear a mask. And let's all be good to each other, because that's the way we're going to get through this. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye. One of the ways that I am able to podcast is the support of not only my listeners, but my patrons. We do have a Patreon page that is available. And I want to thank Mary, Thomas, Terry Smith, Elizabeth Bronson, Dale Hosick, Andrew Goddard, Stephen Malio, Anna Lynn, Betsy Hodges, Steve Rogers, Holly McMillan, and Chris Bloom. Thank you guys so much for your financial support and pledge. You guys are my heroes. Thank you. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts as well as a Merry Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference. You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.